On a bright spring morning in downtown Seattle, 9-year-old Sarah Chen was excited for her weekly visit to Maple Grove Park. The sun cast warm rays through the cherry blossoms, creating dancing shadows on her purple wheelchair. Her dedicated caregiver, Maria Rodriguez, had been taking her to this park every Wednesday for the past 2 years. Sarah was born with cerebral palsy, but her condition never dimmed her bright smile or her love for watching other children play. Her specially adapted wheelchair, decorated with colorful butterfly stickers, allowed her to move around comfortably. Her parents had worked extra hours at their family restaurant to afford this wheelchair that gave their daughter more independence. Maria pushed Sarah's wheelchair along the smooth concrete path, pointing out the newly bloomed flowers and the squirrels chasing each other up the trees. Sarah's eyes sparkled with joy as she watched a group of children playing tag near the playground. Though she couldn't join them physically, she enjoyed creating stories in her mind about their adventures. The park was particularly busy that morning. Young mothers pushed strollers along the walking paths, elderly couples sat on benches feeding pigeons, and office workers hurried through on their way to nearby buildings, coffee cups in hand. The sound of children's laughter mixed with chirping birds created a peaceful atmosphere that Sarah loved. Maria stopped at their usual spot, a quiet corner near the playground where they could watch everything happening in the park. She spread out a checkered blanket on the grass next to Sarah's wheelchair and unpacked their morning snacks: apple slices, crackers, and Sarah's favorite strawberry juice. "Look, Sarah," Maria pointed to a street performer setting up his guitar near the fountain. "We might get some music today." Sarah clapped her hands in excitement, making the medical alert bracelet on her wrist jingle softly. As they enjoyed their snacks, Sarah noticed two police officers walking through the park. They were moving slowly, stopping occasionally to talk to different people. She had always been taught that police officers were there to help people, just like the friendly officer Jenny who visited her school last month to talk about safety. The morning was perfect until those same officers started walking toward them. Sarah felt Maria tense up beside her, something she had never felt from her usually calm caregiver. The officers' faces looked stern, and their hands rested on their belts in a way that made Sarah uncomfortable. Several other parkgoers had also noticed the officers' approach. A woman reading on a nearby bench lowered her book, watching the scene unfold. An elderly man who had been feeding pigeons turned his full attention to their direction. Among the observers was a distinguished-looking gentleman in a suit, sitting with two young children who appeared to be his grandchildren. Sarah didn't understand why, but she could feel the atmosphere in the park changing. The laughter and chatter seemed to dim, replaced by an unusual tension. Maria stood up slowly, moving closer to Sarah's wheelchair in a protective manner. The officers were now just a few feet away, their shadows falling across Sarah's butterfly-decorated wheelchair. Officer Edwards, the taller of the two, had a stern expression that made Sarah shrink back in her seat. Officer Martinez stood slightly behind, his hands still resting on his belt. "What are you doing here?" Officer Edwards's voice was harsh, nothing like Officer Jenny's friendly tone. The question seemed strange to Sarah. They were just having snacks in the park, something they did every week. Maria spoke softly but clearly. "We're just having our regular morning at the park. Officers, is there a problem?" Sarah noticed more people gathering around them, though they kept their distance. The street performer had stopped setting up his guitar and was watching intently. A mother with two children had paused on the path, her phone held up as if taking pictures of the cherry blossoms, but Sarah could see it was pointed in their direction. The tension in the air grew thicker as Officer Edwards took another step forward, his shadow now completely covering Sarah's wheelchair. She clutched her medical alert bracelet, a nervous habit she had developed over the years. The morning that had started so perfectly was about to take an unexpected turn, and none of them were prepared for what would happen next. The gentleman in the suit had quietly taken out his phone, holding it at an angle that wasn't immediately obvious to the officers. His grandchildren looked worried, but he patted their hands reassuringly, his eyes never leaving the scene unfolding before them. Officer Edwards loomed over Sarah and Maria, his demeanor growing increasingly hostile. "We've received complaints about suspicious activity in this area," he announced, though no such reports had actually been filed that morning. Officer Martinez hung back, looking uncomfortable but remaining silent. "ID, now," Officer Edwards demanded, directing his words at Maria. His hand still rested on his belt, fingers drumming against the leather. Maria reached slowly into her bag, careful to keep her movements clear and visible. She pulled out her caregiver ID card and work permit. I am Sarah's caregiver. We come here every Wednesday morning, Maria explained calmly, though her voice trembled slightly. Sarah could feel her caregiver's hand shaking as it rested protectively on her wheelchair. Officer Edwards barely glanced at the documents. How do we know you're really her caregiver? Could be trafficking for all we know. These people often use disabled kids as cover. His words were sharp and loaded with prejudice, causing several nearby witnesses to gasp audibly. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, not fully understanding the situation but feeling the hostility directed at them. She clutched her medical alert bracelet tighter, its familiar touch providing little comfort in this frightening moment. Officer, please. Maria's voice remained steady despite her fear. Sarah's parents own the Golden Dragon restaurant just 3 blocks from here. You can call them to verify. Shut up, Officer Edwards snapped, cutting her off. I'm tired of you people coming here and causing trouble. This park is for decent families. The gathering crowd grew larger, with more phones discreetly recording the incident. The distinguished gentleman in the suit, Judge Michael Thompson, had positioned himself closer while keeping his grandchildren safely back. His jaw was set in a hard line as he documented every word and action. A young mother stepped forward, pushing her stroller. Officers, this is ridiculous. I see them here every week. They're doing nothing wrong. Officer Martinez finally spoke up, touching his partner's arm. Ed, maybe we should. Back off, Martinez. Edwards barked. I'm handling this. He turned back to Maria and Sarah. Stand up, he ordered Sarah, either ignoring or not caring about her wheelchair. Maria's face paled. Sir, Sarah has cerebral palsy. She cannot. I said stand up. Edwards's voice rose dangerously. Sarah began to cry silently, her small body trembling in her wheelchair. The butterfly stickers that had brought her so much joy now seemed to mock the situation. The crowd's murmuring grew louder. Judge Thompson had seen enough. He ended his recording and dialed a number on his phone, speaking quietly but urgently. Several other parents had gathered their children closer, shielding them from the scene while maintaining their vigilant watch. Officer Edwards reached toward Sarah's wheelchair, presumably to force the issue, when a commanding voice cut through the tension like a knife. Officer Edwards, badge number 47,291. Step away from the child immediately. The voice belonged to Police Captain Diana Rodriguez, no relation to Maria, which just arrived at the park after receiving an urgent call from Judge Thompson. She strode purposefully toward the scene, her presence immediately commanding attention. Edwards straightened up, his face showing the first signs of uncertainty. Captain, I said step away, Captain Rodriguez repeated, her voice leaving no room for argument. She positioned herself between the officers and Sarah's wheelchair, her back straight and her expression stern. The tension in the air shifted. Sarah's tears slowed as she felt the protective presence of the captain. Maria's hand steadied on the wheelchair handle, though her heart still raced from the confrontation. Captain Rodriguez turned to face Sarah and Maria, her expression softening. Are you both all right? She asked gently. When they nodded, she continued, Judge Thompson has brought this situation to my attention. We will be addressing this immediately. The crowd began to disperse, though many stayed within earshot, wanting to ensure Sarah and Maria's safety. Judge Thompson approached with his grandchildren, introducing himself properly and assuring them that this incident would not be swept under the rug. As Captain Rodriguez dealt with her officers, leading them away for an immediate suspension pending investigation, the morning's events had already begun spreading through social media and local news channels. What started as a peaceful morning in the park would soon become a catalyst for change in the police department and the community at large. Judge Michael Thompson's presence at Maple Grove Park that morning had not been a coincidence. After receiving several informal complaints about police conduct in the area, he had chosen to spend more time there with his grandchildren, Emma and Lucas, hoping to observe the situation firsthand. As a respected member of the Police Advisory Board for 25 years, Thompson had dedicated his career to ensuring justice and fair treatment for all citizens. At 68, his silver hair and dignified appearance commanded respect, but it was his sharp mind that had earned him his reputation for fairness. From his bench near the cherry blossoms, Thompson had watched the entire scene unfold. His phone had captured every word, every gesture, and every abuse of power. His grandchildren, aged 10 and 8, sat quietly beside him, their eyes wide with concern as they witnessed the treatment of Sarah and her caregiver. "Grandpa," Emma whispered, tugging at his sleeve. "Why are they being so mean to that little girl?" Thompson squeezed his granddaughter's hand gently. "Sometimes, Emma, people let fear and ignorance guide their actions. That's why it's important to stand up when we see something wrong." While maintaining his recording, Thompson had sent text messages to 3 key figures: Captain Rodriguez, whom he had known for years, District Attorney Sandra Chen, and Maria Torres, the head of Internal Affairs. Each message included a brief video clip of the ongoing harassment. The judge's careful documentation didn't stop with just recording. He noted the exact time, the officers' badge numbers, and the names of other witnesses who had pulled out their phones. His years on the bench had taught him the importance of thorough documentation. As he watched Captain Rodriguez arrive and take control of the situation, Thompson noticed something that others might have missed. Officer Martinez, the younger of the 2 officers, had shown visible discomfort throughout his partner's actions. This detail would become important later in the investigation. After the immediate confrontation ended, Thompson approached Sarah and Maria. He knelt down to Sarah's eye level, his kind eyes meeting hers. "Hello, Sarah. I'm Judge Thompson. You've been very brave today." Sarah wiped her tears and managed a small smile. The judge's gentle demeanor helped ease some of her fear. Emma and Lucas, sensing it was safe now, moved closer to introduce themselves to Sarah. "Miss Rodriguez," Thompson addressed Maria, handing her his business card. "I want you to know that what happened here today will not be ignored. I've already set several things in motion." He explained that his position on the Police Advisory Board gave him significant influence in matters of police conduct. The video evidence he had gathered would be crucial in the upcoming investigation. While they talked, Thompson noticed that several other witnesses had gathered nearby, waiting to offer their statements and contact information. Among them was Dr. Rachel Kim, a child psychologist who had also been in the park with her son. She approached to offer her professional support for Sarah if needed. "The community is watching," Thompson assured Maria. "This incident will lead to real changes in how our police department operates." His grandchildren had already begun showing Sarah their favorite game on their tablet, the earlier tension forgotten in the way only children can manage. Thompson smiled, watching the natural friendship forming despite the morning's events. What Officer Edwards hadn't known was that Judge Thompson had been instrumental in implementing police reforms in 3 other districts. His reputation for fairness and thoroughness made him both respected and feared among those who abused their authority. As he helped gather witness statements and contact information, Thompson was already forming a plan. This incident would become a cornerstone case in his ongoing effort to reform police training and accountability measures. "Your next steps are crucial," he explained to Maria, writing down additional contact numbers. "I've arranged for a meeting tomorrow with the police commissioner and the head of internal affairs. Sarah's parents should attend if possible." Before leaving the park, Thompson made one final call to his colleague at the local news station, knowing that public awareness would help ensure this case received proper attention. He watched as Sarah, now more relaxed, showed Emma and Lucas her butterfly stickers. The morning's events had revealed both the worst and best of human nature, the ugliness of prejudice, but also the strength of a community standing together against injustice. Judge Thompson knew that his hidden observation would become the catalyst for meaningful change in the department, ensuring that no other child would face what Sarah had endured that morning. As the confrontation at Maple Grove Park intensified, the community's response proved swift and powerful. Amanda Chen, a civil rights attorney who had been jogging through the park, stopped her morning run the moment she saw Officer Edwards' aggressive stance towards Sarah and Maria. Chen pulled out her phone and began taking detailed notes while moving closer to the scene. Her legal training kicked in as she documented badge numbers, exact quotes, and timestamps. But it was her identity as a mother of a disabled child that made her blood boil at the sight of such discrimination. "Excuse me," Chen's voice cut through the tension, her tone professional but firm. "I'm an attorney with the Civil Rights Legal Foundation, and I'm witnessing multiple violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act right now." Several other park regulars joined her. Mrs. Peterson, who ran the local bakery, stepped forward with her phone recording. Behind her, Mr. Jackson, a retired teacher, positioned himself protectively near Sarah's wheelchair. Two college students who had been studying nearby stood up, their laptops forgotten as they moved closer to show their support. "We're all witnesses here," Chen continued, addressing both officers. "Every person in this vicinity has their phone out. This harassment is being documented from multiple angles." She gestured to the growing crowd, where at least a dozen phones were visible. Sarah, still trembling in her wheelchair, watched in amazement as more people gathered around her, and Maria, a young mother with twins, brought them water. A teenage skateboarder who usually practiced near the fountain stood guard nearby, his board tucked under his arm. Maria felt tears of relief forming in her eyes as she watched the community rally around them. The same park where they had felt so threatened moments ago was now filled with defenders, creating a protective circle around them. Chen pulled out her business card and handed it to Maria. "I want you to have this. My firm specializes in cases exactly like this one." She turned to address the gathering crowd. "Will anyone who witnessed the entire incident please stay to provide your contact information? Your testimonies will be crucial." Officer Edwards, who had been momentarily stunned by the crowd's intervention, attempted to reassert his authority. "This is a police matter. Everyone needs to disperse." "Actually," Chen interrupted, "this is now a civil rights matter. You're creating a hostile environment for a disabled minor and her legal caregiver. Would you like me to list the specific statutes you're violating? I'd be happy to cite them." The crowd murmured in approval. A local news van had pulled up to the park entrance, likely alerted by one of the witnesses. The reporter, Sandra Martinez, was already setting up her camera, sensing an important story developing. Mrs. Peterson had begun collecting witness statements on her tablet, organizing people into a line. "We're not going anywhere," she declared firmly. "We see Sarah and Maria here every week. They're part of our community." The skateboarder, Tommy, spoke up unexpectedly. "Sarah always waves at us when we're practicing our tricks. She's like our mascot, man. You mess with her, you mess with all of us." The atmosphere had completely transformed. What began as an instance of police harassment had evolved into a powerful display of community solidarity. Even Officer Martinez had stepped back, clearly uncomfortable with his partner's actions and the public response they had triggered. Judge Thompson, still observing from nearby, nodded approvingly at the community's response. This was exactly the kind of civic engagement he had hoped to see. The presence of so many witnesses and their willingness to stand up against injustice would make the upcoming investigation impossible to ignore. As Captain Rodriguez arrived on the scene, she found not just a case of police misconduct, but a mobilized community ready to take action. Chen quickly briefed her on the legal implications while other witnesses lined up to provide statements. Sarah, watching all of this unfold, began to feel safe again. The teenager who had called her their mascot made funny faces at her until she giggled. The college students showed her pictures of their cats on their phones. The community had transformed a traumatic experience into a powerful lesson about standing together against injustice. Maria squeezed Sarah's hand, whispering, "See, Maija? We are not alone. We were never alone." The morning sun caught the butterfly stickers on Sarah's wheelchair, making them shimmer like beacons of hope in the midst of positive change. David and Linda Chen received Maria's urgent call while preparing for the lunch rush at their restaurant, Golden Dragon. The panic in Maria's voice made Linda drop the plate she was holding, sending it crashing to the floor. Without hesitation, David flipped the open sign to closed, and they rushed to Maple Grove Park. When they arrived, the scene before them was unlike anything they had expected. Their daughter Sarah was surrounded by a protective circle of community members, while two police officers stood off to the side with Captain Rodriguez. Judge Thompson was speaking with a news crew, and a woman in running gear was distributing business cards. Linda ran to Sarah, dropping to her knees beside the wheelchair. "Baby, are you okay?" she asked, checking her daughter for any signs of distress. Sarah's eyes were red from crying, but she managed a small smile. "Mommy, so many people helped us," Sarah said, pointing to the crowd. "Tommy showed me his skateboard tricks, and Emma shared her tablet with me." David's reaction was more controlled, but the tension in his jaw revealed his anger. He approached Captain Rodriguez, his usual quiet demeanor replaced by fierce parental protection. These officers harassed my daughter, a 9-year-old in a wheelchair? Captain Rodriguez held up her hand. Mr. Chen, I assure you, this incident is being taken very seriously. Both officers have been suspended pending investigation. Amanda Chen, the civil rights attorney, no relation to Sarah's family, stepped forward to introduce herself. Mr. and Mrs. Chen, I witnessed the entire incident. Your daughter's rights were clearly violated, and we have substantial evidence from multiple sources. The news crew from Channel 7 had captured everything since their arrival. Reporter Sandra Martinez approached the family, microphone in hand. Mr. and Mrs. Chen, would you be willing to share your thoughts about what happened here today? Before they could respond, Judge Thompson intervened. Perhaps we should move this conversation somewhere more private. The Golden Dragon restaurant is nearby, correct? The suggestion was welcomed by everyone. The Chen family's restaurant became an impromptu meeting place for all involved parties. Regular customers arriving for lunch found a private event sign on the door. Inside the restaurant, the large round tables that usually hosted family dinners now served a different purpose. Maps of the park were spread out, witness statements were collected, and photos and videos were shared via airdrop. Sarah sat at a special table with Emma, Lucas, and Tommy, eating ice cream that Mrs. Peterson had brought from her bakery. The children's area had become a safe haven where Sarah could process the morning's events surrounded by her new friends. Linda moved between the tables, serving hot tea to everyone despite their insistence that she shouldn't. It was her way of maintaining normalcy in an abnormal situation. David sat with Judge Thompson and Captain Rodriguez, his hands clenched under the table as they discussed next steps. Amanda Chen was building a solid case. The evidence is overwhelming, she explained, scrolling through dozens of videos on her laptop. We have multiple angles of the incident, clear audio of the discriminatory comments, and over 20 witness statements. Maria sat quietly in a corner, still shaken. Linda noticed and brought her a bowl of hot soup. You protected our daughter, she said softly. Your family, Maria, will face this together. The afternoon wore on, and the meeting evolved into a strategy session. Judge Thompson outlined the process for filing formal complaints. Captain Rodriguez detailed the internal investigation procedures. Amanda Chen explained the civil rights aspects of the case. But something unexpected was also happening. The incident had sparked a larger conversation about community policing. Tommy and his skateboarding friends offered to help patrol the park. Mrs. Peterson suggested creating a neighborhood watch program. The college students proposed developing an app for reporting and documenting similar incidents. As evening approached, Sarah had fallen asleep in her wheelchair, emotionally exhausted but peaceful. The butterfly stickers caught the setting sun's rays through the restaurant windows, creating small rainbow patterns on the wall. David and Linda stood together, watching their daughter sleep while the community continued planning around them. What had started as a traumatic morning had transformed into a powerful demonstration of community solidarity. We're not just fighting for Sarah, Linda whispered to David. We're fighting for every child who might face this in the future. Judge Thompson overheard her words and nodded solemnly. And that's exactly why we'll win this fight, he assured them, because it's not just about one incident anymore. It's about changing the system itself. The internal affairs investigation into the Maple Grove Park incident began early the next morning. Lieutenant Maria Torres, head of internal affairs, sat at her desk reviewing the mountain of evidence collected from the previous day. The wall of her office was covered with photos, timelines, and witness statements. Multiple screens displayed different angles of the incident. Judge Thompson's recording provided the clearest view, showing Officer Edwards' aggressive behavior and discriminatory comments in sharp detail. The audio was particularly damning, capturing every harsh word directed at Sarah and Maria. Play that section again, Torres instructed her assistant. Leaning forward, as she watched Officer Edwards' interaction with Sarah, she made detailed notes, paying special attention to Officer Martinez's body language and attempts to intervene. The investigation revealed troubling patterns. A deep dive into Officer Edwards' personnel file showed 3 previous complaints of discriminatory behavior that had been dismissed or buried. 2 had involved minorities, and 1 that concerned a disabled veteran. All had been filed within the last 18 months. Officer Martinez's file told a different story. A relatively new officer, he had excellent community relations ratings and no complaints. During his interview with Internal Affairs, he spoke honestly about his discomfort with his partner's behavior. "I should have done more," Martinez admitted, his voice heavy with regret. "I knew it was wrong, but I hesitated. The culture here, you don't speak against your partner." Torres nodded, understanding the unwritten rules that often protected bad behavior. But this case was different. The evidence was too clear, the witnesses too numerous, and Judge Thompson's involvement made it impossible to ignore. The investigation expanded beyond just the park incident. Torres assigned teams to interview other community members about their interactions with Officer Edwards. Stories began emerging. Small business owners who felt harassed, elderly residents who had been intimidated, young people who avoided certain areas when he was on patrol. Captain Rodriguez joined the investigation, bringing additional resources. "We need to look at every case Edwards has been involved in," she insisted. "If there's a pattern of discrimination, we need to know about it." The tech team recovered deleted text messages between Edwards and other officers, revealing casual racism and ableist attitudes. The messages showed a disturbing culture of discrimination that had gone unchecked for too long. Sarah's case had opened a door, and behind it lay years of systematic problems that could no longer be ignored. Torres worked late into the night, building a comprehensive report that would be impossible to dismiss. 2 weeks into the investigation, Torres called a meeting with the police commissioner. Her presentation was meticulous, supported by evidence from multiple sources. The documentation was overwhelming. Witness statements, video recordings, text messages, previous complaints, and patterns of behavior. "This isn't just about one incident," Torres explained, showing a map of complaints across the district. "Officer Edwards' behavior is a symptom of larger problems in our department. We have a responsibility to address them all." The commissioner sat silently, reviewing the evidence. Finally, he looked up. "What are your recommendations, Lieutenant?" Torres laid out a comprehensive plan: immediate termination for Officer Edwards, mandatory retraining for the entire department, new oversight procedures, and community involvement in police training. For Officer Martinez, she recommended counseling and reassignment, acknowledging his attempts to intervene while addressing his failure to stop his partner's behavior more forcefully. The investigation's findings would have far-reaching consequences. Other departments began reviewing their own procedures, and police training programs across the state started incorporating lessons learned from the Maple Grove Park incident. Sarah's case had become a catalyst for change, forcing a long-overdue examination of police conduct and department culture. The little girl with butterfly stickers on her wheelchair had unknowingly sparked a revolution in law enforcement accountability. As Torres finished her final report, she added a personal note. "The true measure of law enforcement is not in how we exercise power, but in how we protect the vulnerable." The Maple Grove Park incident reminds us that our badge is a symbol of public trust, not authority without accountability. The investigation was complete, but its impact was just beginning. The changes it would bring would ensure that no other child would face what Sarah experienced that spring morning in the park. 3 months after the Maple Grove Park incident, Chief of Police Robert Anderson stood before a packed press conference at City Hall. The room buzzed with anticipation as reporters, community leaders, and citizens gathered to hear the department's official response to the internal. "Today, we announced several major decisions and changes," Anderson began, his voice firm. "Officer James Edwards has been terminated from the Seattle Police Department, effective immediately. His actions at Maple Grove Park violated not only our department's policies, but basic human decency." The announcement rippled through the crowd. Sarah's parents, sitting in the front row with their daughter, held hands tightly. Maria, their faithful caregiver, wiped tears from her eyes as she sat beside them. Additionally, Anderson continued, "We are implementing comprehensive reforms in our department." He outlined new mandatory training programs focusing on disability rights, racial sensitivity, and community policing. Every officer would be required to complete these courses within 6 months. Officer Martinez, who had been temporarily reassigned during the investigation, was ordered to undergo specialized training before returning to patrol duties. His new assignment would include working with the department's community outreach program, where his experience could help train other officers about the importance of speaking up against misconduct. The changes didn't stop there. The Police Advisory Board, led by Judge Thompson, gained new oversight powers. Regular community meetings would be held in each district, allowing citizens to voice concerns directly to police leadership. But perhaps most importantly, Anderson added, "We are establishing the Sarah Chen Initiative." He gestured toward Sarah, who sat proudly in her butterfly-decorated wheelchair. "This program will create partnerships between our officers and families with disabled children, ensuring our department better understands and serves all members of our community." Sarah beamed as the crowd applauded. The initiative named after her would help train officers to interact appropriately with disabled individuals and their caregivers. Her traumatic experience would help prevent similar incidents in the future. The consequences extended beyond just the police department. The City Council passed new regulations requiring body cameras to be activated during all civilian interactions. A citizen review board was established to monitor police conduct and review complaints. Local businesses around Maple Grove Park formed a community watch program. Mrs. Peterson's Bakery became a safe haven, displaying a special sticker indicating it was a safe space where anyone could seek help if they felt threatened or discriminated against. Tommy and his skateboarding friends were invited to participate in community policing workshops, sharing their perspectives on building trust between youth and law enforcement. Their insights proved valuable in developing new approaches to community engagement. The ripple effects reached other departments across the state. Police academies revised their training curricula, incorporating lessons learned from the Maple Grove Park incident. Sarah's story became a case study in proper handling of situations involving disabled individuals and minorities. One afternoon, a month after the press conference, Sarah returned to Maple Grove Park with Maria. This time, they were greeted by Officer Jessica Chen, no relation, one of the first graduates of the new training program. She stopped to chat with Sarah, admiring her butterfly stickers and asking about her day. "This is how it should have been from the beginning," Maria remarked, watching the positive interaction. Other families in the park smiled, seeing the change in police behavior firsthand. The consequences of that spring morning continued to unfold. Officer Edwards' termination sent a clear message that discrimination would not be tolerated. The new training programs and community initiatives showed the department's commitment to meaningful change. Judge Thompson, watching these developments from his position on the Police Advisory Board, felt satisfied with the progress. "Sometimes it takes a moment of crisis to bring about necessary change," he observed during a board meeting. "What happened to Sarah was terrible, but the response has transformed our community." The butterfly stickers on Sarah's wheelchair had become a symbol of transformation, not just for the police department, but for the entire community. Her story reminded everyone that positive change was possible when people stood together against injustice. As summer turned to fall, Maple Grove Park remained a testament to these changes. Officers regularly stopped to chat with families. Community events brought people together, and Sarah's weekly visits became a celebration of progress rather than a reminder of trauma. 1 year after the Maple Grove Park incident, the community gathered for a special celebration. The park, now renamed Unity Gardens, hosted its first annual Community Unity Festival. Sarah, now 10 years old, sat on a specially constructed platform near the park's entrance, her wheelchair adorned with fresh butterfly stickers. She had grown taller over the year, but her bright smile remained the same. As the guest of honor, she watched proudly as hundreds of people filled the park. The festival showcased the remarkable changes that had transformed their community. Police officers played basketball with local teenagers, including Tommy and his skateboarding friends who now served as youth advisors to the department. Mrs. Peterson's Bakery had set up a booth offering free cookies, while Mr. Jackson coordinated activities for children with disabilities. Officer Martinez, now a sergeant leading the community outreach program, demonstrated new police training techniques to interested residents. His presentation included proper approaches to interacting with disabled individuals and their caregivers, using lessons learned from the previous year's incident. "A year ago, I was afraid to speak up," Martinez told the crowd. "Today, we're teaching officers that their first duty is to protect and serve everyone in our community, regardless of their abilities or background." The Chen family's Golden Dragon restaurant had set up a food station serving their famous dumplings. Linda and David Chen watched their daughter greet festival attendees, marveling at how their family's painful experience had sparked such positive change. Judge Thompson, walking through the festival with his grandchildren, stopped to chat with various community members. Emma and Lucas, who had remained close friends with Sarah, were helping younger children with art projects at the Butterfly Station, a creative space where kids could make their own wheelchair decorations. Maria, still Sarah's dedicated caregiver, sat nearby, remembering the fear she had felt that spring morning a year ago. Now, she watched as new caregivers received training certificates from the police department's disability awareness program. "Look how far we've come," she said to Sarah, pointing at the diverse crowd enjoying the festival. Children in wheelchairs moved freely through the specially designed pathways, their parents relaxed and smiling. Police officers chatted casually with residents, building relationships that would prevent future incidents. The Sarah Chen initiative had expanded beyond just police training. It now included programs in schools, teaching children about disability awareness and inclusion. Local businesses had implemented accessibility improvements, and the city had increased funding for disability services. Captain Rodriguez, recently promoted to deputy chief, delivered a speech about the department's transformation. "Sometimes change comes from unexpected places," she said, gesturing toward Sarah. "A little girl's courage showed us where we needed to improve, and a community's response showed us how to do it." The festival also unveiled new features in the park: wheelchair-accessible playground equipment, sensory gardens for children with autism, and emergency call boxes with direct lines to trained officers. These improvements made Unity Gardens a model for inclusive public spaces. As evening approached, the community gathered for a special ceremony. Sarah, supported by her parents, cut a ribbon to officially open the Butterfly Path, a scenic walkway decorated with illuminated butterfly sculptures, each one representing a positive change implemented over the past year. Tommy and his friends performed a skateboarding demonstration on the new accessible ramps, showing how inclusive design could benefit everyone. The crowd cheered as Sarah joined them for a gentle roll down the smooth surface, her laughter echoing across the park. The day ended with a lantern release. Hundreds of paper lanterns, each carrying messages of hope and unity, floated into the twilight sky. Sarah watched them rise, holding her parents' hands, her medical alert bracelet catching the light of the setting sun. "Mom," she whispered, "remember when I was scared to come to the park? Now it feels like home." The transformation of Maple Grove Park into Unity Gardens symbolized more than just physical changes. It represented a community's commitment to protecting its most vulnerable members. The power of speaking up against injustice, and the possibility of turning painful experiences into positive change. As the last lanterns disappeared into the darkening sky, the community had proved that real change was possible when people stood together. Sarah's story had become not just a catalyst for reform, but a reminder that every person, regardless of their abilities, deserved to feel safe, respected, and included in their community.